What's going on, everyone? Chris Clark here from GamecockCentral.com, joining you for GC Live solo for the first few minutes. Busy week. Wes Mitchell, my partner in crime, will be joining me very shortly to resume his duties as I call Wes a little bit more of the host of the show, drives the bus a little bit more because he's smarter than me technologically, and does a lot of the production stuff for us, does an outstanding job for us here on GC Live. But obviously a lot to get to this week, right? We've just seen South Carolina wrap up a baseball series. First, aside from the Clemson series, first big series on the road against Texas, an unfortunate sweep in the wrong direction for the South Carolina baseball program. So where do they go from here? We'll talk about that a little bit. Obviously, spring football getting ready to go in the next several days. Right at the beginning of the show, for those of you that hadn't seen it, I'll break down sort of the practice schedule and what to expect there, some of the things that you need to know. And obviously, maybe the biggest storyline in Gamecock land, Gamecock Nation right now is the fact that the basketball program is sort of at a critical juncture where we're probably in the next, couple days, maybe even sooner, have some type of resolution as to what happens with head basketball coach Frank Martin as at the helm of the Gamecock men's basketball program. We're going to have more on that throughout this week as well. Wes Mitchell, who I mentioned, my colleague, will be on here shortly, busy working the phones on that as I have been this morning and throughout the weekend. So what's up to everybody in the chat? Frederick Cooper, Eric Folk, your local sports talk username on YouTube as well. Good to see everybody here. As always, GC Live brought to you by Clint Hammond of the Mortgage Network. Check him out at clinthammond.com, 803-771-6933. Really happy to have Clint on as our primary title sponsor here on GC Live. Great time to refinance your home. If you have any mortgage question whatsoever, if you want to look at refinancing, if you want to look at a second home, if you want to look at a rental property, whatever you want to look at, check out Clint Hammond at the Mortgage Network. Office right across from Dozier High School, downtown Columbia. Does an absolutely outstanding job. Had lunch with him. Big Gamecock fan, big Gamecock Central subscriber, supporter of the program, supporter of the show. So make sure you guys check out Clint Hammond for any of your mortgage needs. We appreciate him being on. So we're open the chat line to your comments, Facebook, Periscope, on Twitter, or of course on YouTube, which if you're not on YouTube, make sure you get on YouTube. That's the best way we think to watch the show live. If you're listening later on the podcast, hello to you as well. Glad to have you listening. Depending on when you're listening to the podcast, some of this information from this show that we do live could, of course, even end up being a little bit outdated because we have a fluid situation going on, obviously, with Frank Martin in the men's head basketball coaching position at South Carolina. Like I said earlier, continuing to track that one. Good afternoon to Kevin from Facebook. Mickey, who says he's watching. Good to see all of you guys. Good to hear from you. Hope everyone had a great weekend. First question here in on the chat line, your local sports talk asks, will y'all talk about recruiting today? I would think we will probably hit on a little bit of recruiting, time pending, because, again, some big storylines. Definitely want to pick Wes's brain with what he's hearing on the basketball situation. I'm sure we'll discuss that a little bit. Obviously, Gamecock baseball. I don't know how much we'll get into with the Texas series, but we certainly will give some thoughts on the Texas series, I would think. And then, obviously, spring football around the corner. So Phil asked from YouTube, what time is the meeting today? Phil, do not have specifics on times of meetings. I think there's more than one meeting. There's already been some preliminary conversations that have been had, I think even last week. Today's a little bit more of a critical juncture with some of those meetings. I don't have the exact times, but definitely stay tuned to GamecockCentral.com. Wes, myself, Colin Taylor, the rest of the team and the crew at GamecockCentral.com will definitely have you covered with all the news and notes on that. And before I move on to first item on our agenda today, which is Gamecock spring practice schedule, we are going to break that down a little bit for you, just in case you sort of missed it in the last several days, as far as what the schedule is, what the availability is for media, even for fans, all those different types of things, going to break that down. But first, got to give a little shout out, GamecockCentral.com. If you're not a subscriber, come and join us. A lot of you do a great job asking us questions here. We try to get all your questions here on YouTube. You can ask us a question at any time on the Insiders Forum. If you're a member, you get access to all of our content. During football season, for instance, in the fall, we'll have 50 content items a week. You can unlock all of them by becoming a member to GamecockCentral.com. Join.GamecockCentral.com. If you'd like to hop on there and join us, we would absolutely love to have you. So hope everybody's doing well. So let's dive in real quick. First thing that I wanted to mention, because it came out, I think, 3 days ago, Gamecock football is set to begin spring practice on March the 20th. Excuse me, beginning spring practice on March 20th. Spring practice is scheduled to culminate with the annual Garnet and Black game on April the 24th. So Shane Beamer is going to hold sort of a pre-spring press conference on Thursday, March 18th, 1 p.m. Yes, we will certainly have complete coverage of that on GamecockCentral.com. And South Carolina's media relations department with Steve Fink and his crew that do a really good job giving us information. They have run down sort of a schedule. All of the assistants are going to speak during spring practice. Marcus Satterfield, the offensive coordinator, and Clayton White, defensive coordinator, will both speak during the spring. Right now, we are scheduled as media members to be able to see portions of 4, I believe, spring practices. So we are going to be able to see the stretch period, which is basically warm-ups, and then the first 3 periods of spring practice. So we'll probably see 15 to 20, 25 minutes of 4 separate practices, some in March and then some in April. And I think some people were wondering if we would be able to see more as media members or even as fans. There's no fan access to spring practice as of right now, although no decision has been made to date on the Garnet and Black game, the annual spring game. South Carolina, attached in their release to us, passed us a note that there will be a determination at a later date about the Garnet and Black game in terms of more information. So I would imagine there's going to be some level of fan access to the Garnet and Black game, but we just don't know that yet. Still sorting through some of those details. I think you got to keep in mind there is going to be a more open atmosphere around the football program in terms of spring practice access. There's a few different components to that. Number one, we're getting to talk to assistant coaches a little bit more. Number two, and this is maybe the biggest one, we are going to be able to speak to anyone in the locker room. So, for instance, under Will Muschamp, the policy, and Nick Saban had this policy, Kirby Smart has this policy, no freshmen speak with the media for their first year on campus. So even, for instance, Ryan Helinski's first year at South Carolina in 2019, he didn't speak with the media. He was the starting quarterback at times. Brandon McElwain, in 2016 at times started games for South Carolina and, did not speak with the media. So everybody in that locker room, basically nobody's off limits to be requested. Doesn't mean we'll necessarily get to talk to him, but there are certain freshmen that we may have a chance to speak with this year because they're allowed to speak with the media. I think maybe some fans are wondering, hey, would fans get to go to spring practice or would the media? We wondered in the media, hey, will we maybe get a full spring practice? I do think the COVID situation is still playing in this a little bit, still playing into this a little bit. For instance, we're still, when we do view spring practices as media members, we're supposed to be masked. We're supposed to be socially distanced. So I think, those things are worth keeping in mind, right? That there's still the pandemic going on. People are certainly very hopeful that we're on the back end of that. And there's certainly a hope. And there, at this point, guys, there's an expectation that there's going to be more fans, that there's going to be potentially a ton more fans in Williams-Brice Stadium this season, but football season's obviously later. We're talking about preseason practice going into August. We're talking about the season in September. I would think there's a good chance under Shane Beamer that maybe by the time August comes around, by the time preseason camp comes around, there will be some opportunities, perhaps, whether it's media, fans, or both, to see some full spring practices. And my expectation, I don't know this for sure, but I think the Garnet Black game, you're going to have the potential to maybe go out there and check out some spring football and feel a little bit more normal at that time. So again, if you want to check out the full spring practice schedule, excuse me, it is on GamecockCentral.com. 2 scrimmages prior to the spring game, April 10th, April 17th. Those will be team, scrimmages, official scrimmages. Again, there won't be access, for any of those, but we will have access as media for 4 different spring practices throughout spring. So again, make sure you go check out GamecockCentral.com for coverage throughout the spring. All right, got a few more questions here from the chat line. Your local sports talk. Thanks again for another question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how big is Frank Martin on the hot seat? I think the way that I would answer that is obviously, things are at a critical juncture right now. And so anytime there's a serious possibility of a change being made, I think you tend to ramp the hot seat up as high as it would go. A 9 or a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, I think would certainly be fair, because you're talking about a situation where there's a very real possibility, that Frank Martin is back. Now, Wes and I have been reporting this story this morning, working on some different things, working on an update for our subscribers on GamecockCentral.com to roll out that has a lot more detail that we're still working through, making some phone calls and things like that on. So we'll have to see how that continues to play out. I think the word that Wes used when we spoke about it on the phone this morning off air was, that it's a fluid situation. And so that's what we're going to have to continue monitoring. And we'll keep everyone updated on that. But yeah, it's pretty critical juncture right now. And Eric follows up with another question. What do you think about PJ Dozier's tweet about Frank? I'm not surprised about it. Anytime you see, former players who love their coach and their coach is in sort of a critical situation. We've seen it with football coaches. We've seen it with basketball coaches. You're going to see them come out with support. So I'm not surprised about that whatsoever. It looks like we got Wes about on board. Wes, you good to go? I'm going to bring on my colleague, Wes Mitchell here. What's going on, Wes?
What's up, man? How we doing? Have we had some good questions so far?
Had some good questions. Had hopefully some decent answers, but I don't know. Wes coming in to save the day now, and we're switched sides. I don't know if that'll bother everybody. But Wes going to hold down the right side, or maybe you can switch it up. Man. That makes you feel better about things.
No, let's roll with it.
We're just going to roll with this configuration. So basically, we open the show. Obviously, the 3 biggest things that obviously planning on hitting on Wes were spring practice. So before you came in, was running down the spring practice schedule for those who may have missed it, since that came out a few days ago. And I can't remember if we even went over that on Friday's show or not, but whatever. I went over it again, even if we did. Some of the specific dates, some of the things to watch out for. And then obviously the other storylines, the baseball team sweep in the wrong direction at Texas, and then the Frank Martin situation. That's first and foremost. So most of the questions we've gotten, still rolling through those, but lots of basketball questions and even some football questions now, getting into some quarterback talk for spring practice and things like that.
Did we tell everybody about Clint Hammond and the Mortgage Network yet?
I had Clint Hammond covered. Oh, yeah. We told people about Clint, the Mortgage Network. Did that at the show open. Told everybody how fantastic Clint was and is, and that they need to hop on ClintHammond.com if they want to refinance their home, get a second home, get a vacation home, rental house, anything that they need, hit up Clint Hammond.
Yeah, get on the Clint Hammond bandwagon. We had a couple of questions here, Chris. I guess we can sort of maybe throw them together. One was about injuries in general, and one was about, as you see on your screen right now, Marshawn Lloyd and his rehab. I tell you, from everything we've heard, both publicly with what Shane Beamer has said, and then of course what we've heard privately, Marshawn Lloyd's rehab has gone very, very well. Possibly even ahead of schedule, but certainly on schedule. And, I think that's something, Chris, you never want to just like push the guy back when you don't have to, in spring practice and stuff. But as far as long-term being in a position to sort of just hit the ground running, so to speak, heading into the fall and be in a position to go play. All good there. Great signs there for Marshawn Lloyd. And really, frankly, that's the position group, if you're a South Carolina fan out there, you're least worried about, I think, right? I mean, you can bring Marshawn Lloyd along at his own pace. Kevin Harris is back, obviously. Kevin Harris ready to be a sort of a bell cow back again. We'll see what that split ends up being. It would have been an interesting split if Marshawn Lloyd was not coming off of an injury. But I think it allows you to sort of ease him back in. Then you got some other guys. I think that, you look at some things Rashad Amos did late last year. We'll see if Zaquandre White can find his way onto the field. You bring in a kid in Juju McDowell who, by all indications, I actually ran completely randomly at a 7-on-7 practice, was talking to a coach a few weeks ago, and he said, "Hey, man, I coached this Juju McDowell kid in high school a few years back." He's like, "South Carolina got a really good one. He's a playmaker." So, I think you look at that position and got to be the least of your worries if you're on that coaching staff, if you're a South Carolina fan. I don't know exactly what position would be the most of your worries, but I know that running back is probably the least of your worries right now.
Yeah, totally agree. I mean, there are some where, defensive backs one that, I think fans will probably be alarmed by until there's cause to not be alarmed. Wide receivers one that, you still look around and say, okay, some guys have got to step up at that position. But running back's one of those. And there, in fairness, there are a few positions where you probably feel pretty decent, about the talent on this football team. And one is running back in terms of the talent and some of the potential depth there. If everybody stays healthy, the offensive line, the defensive line, you feel like there's some good pieces there. And so obviously the running back position is one where as South Carolina builds out this offense, you would think that's certainly a strength for them. Certainly something that they're going to want to do is to go out and run the football. And that's what they had to do last season. In a lot of games, they're able to do that very effectively. Other things, not effectively enough. They're going to have to find some balance, but the running back position is definitely one that you can feel pretty good about. I think this spring, I saw someone asked if there was an assumption that Lloyd would be no contact. Wes, I'm not sure if you know. I don't know that we have a firm answer on that yet, in terms of how much contact he'll do or anything like that. I don't have a firm answer on that right now.
Yeah, don't quote us on that one. I want to say that Beamer said, he was going to be limited in the spring. Just which that would be my assumption, is that you don't run him back out there,
right?
Really for no reason. So, and also that's something I believe that you kind of just play it by ear. Wherever he is at that given time, you do whatever you need to do. But the big thing is that he will roll into the fall. I think. Which that the injury was last preseason, which was actually a little bit later, you remember, than your normal preseasons. And I'm trying to think of exactly where along the line, what day he got hurt. But I would be surprised if he did a ton this spring as far as actual, on the field. Because, this was a non-contact injury in the first place. So I don't know if you want him out there cutting on the thing and tempting fate. So we'll see what their plan is there. Not a doctor, not a trainer, so we'll see. What else do we want to hit on football-wise, Chris?
Well, maybe we could loop in a little bit of quarterback talk with some 2022 recruiting talk. We had a question very early in the show if we were going to hit on any recruiting today. My answer was probably so, if we sort of got into it, depending on what else was going on and how much time we took on some other things. But we've gotten a couple of different questions in terms of quarterback. I know one was, let's go to Darian Moss, who are realistic backup plans at quarterback for the 2022 class. And I'm struggling to find the other question to actually put up and give credit here, but there was some type of question earlier, unless I dreamed it, about 2021 quarterbacks, I thought. But basically, obviously that's going to be a storyline in spring practice. And then it's going to be a storyline in spring and summer recruiting is quarterback. both from the standpoint of A, who wins the job, B, how do you feel about the depth? And then this third part of that, C, would be South Carolina's 2022 quarterback target. To address the recruiting part of it first, Wes, South Carolina, since Shane Beamer was hired, offered 3 quarterbacks, if I'm not mistaken. And those were Tanner Bailey from Alabama, and then Drew Allar out of Ohio, Taven Jackson from Indiana. So the first 2 have committed, Bailey to Oregon, Drew Allar to Penn State. And then we've seen Taven Jackson, which I think in total fairness, it's a guy you offer because he's really talented. Always a longer shot, right? Indiana, his brother plays basketball in Indiana. He's an Indiana kid. So they were always going to be on the mix, and then a bunch of other out-of-state programs that he's interested in. South Carolina did not make the cut there. It was not a surprise. We had heard that had been a ton of communication or reciprocation there. So those 3 guys are basically off the board. Everybody wants to know where South Carolina turns next, and I think it's still a question. I think this is a time period in which, and this is a generalization about South Carolina's recruiting right now, it's critical for this team to have in-person recruiting reopen. It looks like that will happen with at least a quiet period after May 31st. We're probably going to have, I don't want to say probably, we may have some camps on campus at colleges. We'll play it conservative and say that, even though some schools have already announced some camp dates. We're almost certainly going to have the return of visits on campus. Coaches may not be out on the road, but there's going to be some visits allowed. We've seen kids go out and take some visits to schools, just walking around campus, looking at facilities, no face-to-face contact. That looks like it is set to return. And I think that's huge for South Carolina. It's a new staff, new collection of guys. Yes, they brought into South Carolina some pre-existing relationships and things like that. But a lot of guys they're recruiting, West, have never been to South Carolina, or they have definitely not been to campus since this new staff was hired. South Carolina's obviously coming off of back-to-back seasons in which they won a total of 6 games, 12 games over the past 3 years. This program can't Zoom recruit. This isn't Alabama or Georgia. It's going to be tougher to recruit remotely. They've done the best they can with it, what you've got to do. But I think that's going to be big. And so I'd loop that in with the quarterback situation. They're going to have to go scour, look for some more quarterbacks. There's some other guys that they're looking at. There's some other guys that have offers, like Gavin Wimsatt from Kentucky, who's a 4-star guy on Rivals.com. But we just don't know the direction yet. I'm wondering just as much as you guys. But we don't know until they have the opportunity to host some more guys on campus. And so that's what they're doing right now. Any thoughts on quarterback recruiting? I know we got to talk about some of the spring quarterback storylines as well.
Well, and I think in general, as far as recruiting, so it's March 15th right now. And I think now that word is starting to sort of trickle out that, yes, visits are expected. Let's see what that would be 2.5 months from now.
Yeah.
I would imagine the closer you can hold on. Now obviously there are some kids that right now have not committed yet, but already have dates set. Well, I'm going to commit in March, or I'm going to commit in April, I'm going to commit in May, whatever. But a lot of the kids that have sort of been like just holding out hope to take some visits, the closer you get to June 1, I wonder, Chris, if the number of commits sort of slow down and guys don't say, well, I've made it this far. Let me wait it out until the summer and actually take some trips. And I imagine, I remember, when did spring official visits start? I guess we're talking about 3 or 4 years ago now. But, there was some question. Do you save officials? Do you go ahead and roll with officials? If I'm South Carolina, I'm actually taking the Muschamp approach here, and I'm saying let's aim to get these guys on campus as quickly as possible, even if it's of the official visit variety. Forget even trying to get them in unofficially. Just go ahead, burn the officials, guarantee you can get them on campus, and try to just sort of go from there. Now, whether there's a quarterback that they're ready, on their end to bring in an official that soon, on the schools, and they find they like them enough, that'll determine, if they do that at the quarterback position. But in general, talking about some other positions, I wouldn't be shocked, if it's allowed, if they're going to go ahead and say, hey, that first weekend of June, second weekend of June, go ahead and try to get some dudes in and try and build some momentum. Because that's one thing I've consistently said is I think the momentum of this class will be found this summer. So quarterback, that there's still 2.5 weeks, or 2.5 months until then to maybe figure out what that's going to look like. But if it gets to that point and they're still not a top target, then I think it probably becomes a camp thing. Bring in 5, 2022 quarterbacks this camp season and see which one, you like the most in person.
Yeah, exactly. And, you mentioned the possibility of summer official visits. I think provided those do return, and again, that is our expectation. Current dead period ends May 31st. The expectation is that there will at least be some type of quiet period, some type of return to activity. And so we'll see if that means how many camps it means, if it definitely means camps. There's some different thoughts on that percolating behind the scenes right now. But I can tell you, and the listeners, 100%, South Carolina, if they have the opportunity to bring in some guys in summer, that very much appears to be the plan based on some things I've heard, is that they're going to try to bring some guys in at multiple positions this summer. You got to be strategic about it. So there are some guys that you may want to hold over until the season, or maybe after the season for an official visit if you feel like they're close enough and maybe you can get them in unofficially. But like you said, Wes, there's certain guys that, maybe you got a guy out in, Louisiana you're recruiting, or the Northeast. Maybe you feel like from a time standpoint and a distance standpoint, you might need to burn a visit. Jacob Allen from New Jersey, a 4-star offensive lineman. He just went to Penn State and sort of walked around on his own last weekend. That's a guy that has family in South Carolina. This summer is probably a good time to burn that official visit, get him down from New Jersey, have him check things out, summer atmosphere at South Carolina. Got to be strategic about it, but I think that'll certainly happen. Moving to the 21 quarterback battle in terms of who's the starter going to be, who's the backup going to be. Look, here's where I fall on it, Wes. I think it's hard to answer. Like, the way I look at it is Luke Doty has the upper hand because he's completely different offense, but he gained some valuable experience last season, back half of the year, started some games. He's sort of been ingrained in the program. He has really good leadership qualities, all those things. But it's hard to know. Nobody has thrown a pass on the field with these coaches in an actual practice setting yet. That won't happen until later this month, March 20th, a few days. So it's hard to tell. I mean, you sort of ask anybody within the program about that, and it's still sort of a wait and see. So obviously Luke Doty, Colton Gauthier, the freshman quarterback, Jason Brown, the transfer from St. Francis, Connor Jordan, walk on. I mean, all those guys I'm sure are going to get some reps. But I think it's really too soon to know with any sort of like definitive, truth, or even a definitive opinion for me, like which way it's definitely going to go.
Yeah, and I think people want you to give, an opinion on that. Like, people want you to say, well, this is who's going to win it. But as you said, it is very difficult to project it out because there are questions I think they're going to have to be answered on both sides, frankly. I think you look for Luke Doty, the final few games for him, that is valuable SEC experience, just knowing what it's like to run out there, not in front of 80,000 people, obviously, but in front of an arena that holds 80,000 people, you'll say, and, just to experience sort of the grandeur of being on ESPN, like having that many eyeballs, like knowing there's that pressure on you. So that matters, I think. That is different, in my opinion, than playing at a smaller level because you have to sort of find out how a guy is going to react to that. I'll tell you, for me, I look at Jalen Brooks at wide receiver. That's someone a lot of people have maybe even completely given up on as being someone who could help this team. But you look back in practice last year when he first got here, you had guys like J.C. Horn talking like, man, y'all got to see this Jalen Brooks kid. He looks really, really good. I believe playing in the big arena affects guys. Now, can Jalen Brooks bounce back from that? Can he settle in? Can he get comfortable and rely on his natural talent? Then, he's going to have an opportunity to help South Carolina this year. Point being, getting that experience for Luke Doty, even if it isn't with a full crowd, which I think it will be this year, that matters. Now, it's still a new offense for him, as you said. He's going to have to continue to improve as far as his passing ability, as far as when to run, when not to run. There will be different rules within this offense, just as there are different rules in every offense as far as exactly what a coach expects from that position. We've seen, if you look back, we've seen Marcus Satterfield have some offensive schemes that are more quarterback run heavy when he's had a guy who could do that versus not being quarterback run heavy when he had a guy that didn't really fit his skill set. So I'm very interested again to see what the scheme looks like. So then you go to Jason Brown, you say, okay, big kid, big arm, not as fast as Luke Doty, but can definitely move around in the pocket when he needs to. Brings a little bit, heftier guy to bring down. Thick kid. How does he adjust to throwing the ball in tighter windows? How does he adjust to the speed of the defensive front, getting there much quicker at this level than probably, at the level he was playing at right then? But, hey, you look at the numbers, very successful, was able to do things with his legs and with his arm, particularly with his arm, but could extend plays, can really, to throw the cliche out there, he can make all the throws, but this is a guy who has the arm to literally extend the field and make some down the field throws that not every quarterback can make. So it does make for a good competition for South Carolina. We know that. I think the question is, can either one of the guys also use this competition to take that big step forward and give South Carolina the great quarterback play that you have to go win in this league? Because to me, we can talk about running backs, we can talk about the O-line, the receivers we all know are going to have to play better. But ultimately, in today's college football game, it's a quarterback's game on offense. You have to have great play. You have to have playmaking ability from that quarterback position. So the question may not even be who wins it. The question is, for me, whoever wins it, can they sort of take that big step forward and elevate that position, to where it needs to be? There was a question earlier, Chris, that ties into all this about could Joyner possibly get back in the mix at quarterback? We get that question a ton. It always pops up. I rarely say no way on here, but I almost say no way because I think that would not be a great situation for him personally, in that he spent all this time now trying to get comfortable at wide receiver, and then you almost erase it and move him back to quarterback.
Yeah, I think so. And we do get that question a lot. I think it's going to probably persist for the duration of Joyner's career, But yeah, going back to your original point on, not just who wins it, but how good is the play there? Like how much separation can one guy create, and then how effective can he be? And I think when you look at Luke Doty specifically with this skill set, I think you look at Jason Brown, and like he showed the ability at St. Francis at a lower level to make, some of the off-platform throws and move around a little bit. Colton Gauthier, as a freshman, can move around some, and he's a big kid who can make throws. Luke Doty obviously is the most dynamic guy. And so when you're thinking about the offense, the way that Luke Doty can move, the upside that he has, the playmaking potential that he presents, I think that's why he's maybe still the most intriguing option, if I had to say, just my personal opinion, particularly when you look at the fact that South Carolina this season is probably not going to be looking for just a distributor of the football. You tend to look more of that if you had a team that's just loaded at the receiver position. And right now, South Carolina is not. That's the reality of it. Now, maybe they do a really good job developing him. I know Justin Stepp. We've talked about this before, Wes. We feel like he's going to be able to flip that room in recruiting with some of the acquisitions that he makes. But right now, they still have a ways to go. Or I would say, to be completely fair, they just have a lot to prove. This isn't a group that's very proven right now. And they do have some guys on that roster that have been sort of written off because of maybe a lack of production, or maybe they've been injured some. Can some of those guys step forward? If so, that makes, I'm sure, Gamecock fans and this coaching staff feel better about the situation. But until the quarterback position is one where they're going to have to pull, I think, some playmaking ability from that position. And Luke Doty can certainly offer that. But it's going to be, we talked about this a few shows ago. The entire offense, just in and of itself, is the most interesting storyline this spring, just because there's scheme questions, there's position battle questions, there's quarterback questions. There's just a lot to unpack there. And I think we'll have a better sense of it and some more answers as spring progresses.
Yeah, no doubt, man. So we've talked a little bit about storylines, and I don't know what exactly you hit on before I got on as far as the actual team. But is there a guy or two where we're actually going to get to see a little bit of practice?
Yeah.
Still not quite the Spurrier days, right? But we're gonna see the football and South Carolina maybe throw it. Like, we may actually see the football get passed in person.
Not just kicks.
Yeah, maybe.
Three special teams periods.
Yes.
Yeah.
So who or what are you most interested in seeing with your own eyeballs?
Well, I would start at quarterback. I want to see Luke Doty's progression within this. Sort of, if we get a chance to see, I don't know, man, even some offensive formations. I mean, that's what I would like to see. I'd like to see, cumulatively a few periods of maybe some 11-on-11 work. Now, will we see that? I don't know. I'm not banking on that. Maybe it'll be this preseason, say in August, before we see that. But if you're asking what I would like to see, I would like to see that to give us a better sense of how things are going to look, how things are going to be called. I think that would be helpful. But obviously quarterbacks, that's a position I'm going to be watching. Perimeter playmakers. Can anybody we know at running back, some guys, right? But will we see any receivers that can step forward? And then I'll be really curious about defensive backs. So I named way too many things there at once, but you going
to leave anybody for me to say?
Yeah, there's several positions. I probably left about 75 players for you to talk about. So, but no, that's my biggest one is seriously just the composition of the offense and quarterbacks. But defensive back, I think that might even be a bigger concern than receiver right now. I mean, seriously, those are the two biggest concerns, and I think you can make good arguments either ways in terms of just the depth and the experience level at DB. That's a huge question mark too.
Yeah, so as far as just my interest level, I'm most interested in watching Marion Brown and watching E.J. Jenkins, two very different transfers as far as their actual skill set, but both guys that obviously – I tend to think if South Carolina is going to improve on the passing game, these guys are going to have to be a big part of what they do on that side of the ball. So I'm very anxious to see them. I'm curious to see how, just with the eye test, how much does Amarian Brown compare or contrast with say, a Shi Smith? Do they look similar? What does E.J. Jenkins' role end up being? How quickly can he sort of get himself in the mix? We know, Chris, we've been told this kid is massive and that he runs really well for his size. So I'll be curious to see exactly what the plan is for how you get him involved in the offense, if he can separate, against SEC competition, and what those things look like. And if you can sort of incorporate those guys into the mix and go from there. But we won't really know all that from watching them warm up, but we will at least get a feel for their movement capability. Do they look natural? And the first question for this receiving core to me is, can Brown step in and be Shi Smith? The second question is, can somebody else provide that additional threat that they didn't have, on top of having Shi Smith this past season? So I'm very curious to see how that looks. Kyle says he heard that Jenkins is only 6'4". By the way, we still did not get a Greg, right? Greg was the name.
I couldn't remember. He disappeared for so long that I couldn't remember his name either for a while. I was like, I think it's Greg. It's Greg.
Greg, where are you at, man?
He disappeared. I hope we didn't hurt his feelings. We're just sort of joking. But seriously, he better subscribe.
Yeah, I don't think he is, man. By the way, this is National Cancel Your Sling TV Free Trial Day in Gamecock Nation. So if you signed up like that afternoon or that evening, you better hurry up and cancel it now, because you're about to get a charge if you didn't. From what I could tell, it was sort of like down to the minute almost as far as the 3-day free trial. So if you're on a 7-day, you still have time, but go ahead and cancel it, I would say, today. But if you did that 3-day free trial just to watch South Carolina versus Texas, you're not going to be very happy if you accidentally have to pay to watch South Carolina get swept in Texas, which I don't know how much you talked about the series before I got on, Chris, but I did put it in the title of the show, so I guess we'll hit on it just a little bit. Obviously, fans disappointed. I think it's one of those things where if you're South Carolina, you have to learn from it. If you're the team, you have to learn from it. If you're the fan base, you have to acknowledge, okay, this probably exposed some issues with the team right now. There are some problems with, I think the biggest problem, taking advantage of, your opportunities. And South Carolina had several opportunities against a really, really good coaching, or against a really good pitching staff, I should say. And if you have guys on base, you've got to take advantage of that more oftentimes than not. And that was the key, is South Carolina did not take advantage. Texas did. Now, here's the thing. I'm not playing the what-if game for this series because it happened the way it happened. But obviously, there are a few things that if they go differently for South Carolina, maybe a hard hit ball goes through as opposed to being right at somebody. Over the course of a season, those things even out for the most part. So I still don't know if it's time to hit the panic button. But going on the road, really for the first time, as far as, they played on the road. They played at Winthrop. They played a neutral site in Greenville. They played at the Citadel. They've been on the road, but they haven't been on the road to Austin, Texas, across, half of the United States. So learning experience, something to build off of. Very difficult, SEC opener coming up this coming weekend with Vanderbilt. So, there may be a sort of little bit of a struggle here, but the key for South Carolina will be to continue to learn from it, build off of it, and not sort of go into the tank because of a little bit of adversity, because those things even out. Just like, let's be honest, it evens out from the other side too, Chris. That game with the Citadel, you can't count on really good teams making the mistakes in the field that the Citadel did. They had an error early on in that game that put South Carolina in a position to score, and they had a misplayed ball in the outfield that put South Carolina in a position to score more. So you're not going to count on that against good teams. So you can, it evens out. There are games South Carolina has won that maybe wouldn't have gone their way. So the season's still very young. There's still a lot to like about this team. And there's still, some questions. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, no doubt. I think you look at when you start playing these quality teams, and Texas, their record wasn't outstanding. I think they came into the series, 8-5, but still a good ball club, right? And, the pitcher they faced on the first night was as good as they're going to face. Now, the problem is some SEC teams are going to have one or two of those guys, right? Their Friday night guy is going to be close to that good. Their Saturday guy and their Sunday guy may not be far off. But I think South Carolina's pitching in the series, except for day 3, was still really good for the most part. Like, they were still really good. You look at, one of the games, you roll in Sanders, who has been great after a shutdown inning the inning before, which was from, correct me, Wes, tell me who that was that came in before Sanders.
I believe it was Jack Mahoney.
It was Jack Mahoney. I think he struck out the side. And so it's easy to say, well, leave in Mahoney. Well, Will Sanders has been really good this year. He struggled a little bit. So I think the biggest difference was when you play good teams. Now the scary part, I guess you could say, South Carolina is going to play good teams the rest of the season. They're going to play a lot of elite teams that are probably better than Texas. So they've got to fix some of these things, but the margin shrunk. And so South Carolina, they struggled getting runners on base in game 1. They struggled throughout the weekend in driving in runners in scoring position. I remember at one point, maybe midway through game 3, they were 2 for 17 or so with runners in scoring position, producing runs. So that was the difference. Texas made a few more bigger hits in clutch situations, critical situations, and that's just sort of how it went. The pitching, for the most part, for South Carolina is still really good. So, game 2 was the one that they really should have won. They really should have taken at least one of those. That's the way I see it. So definitely disappointing for Gamecock fans, but the competition is definitely not going to get any easier. But it was still a low margin game. But can they come out on the other side of that? So that will tell the story for the rest of the season, I think.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't get any easier. You head to Vandy. Honestly, if you can steal a game from them, that's probably a good weekend. But we'll see. That this is baseball, though. Would it surprise you at all if South Carolina goes to Vandy and somehow steals, 2 of 3? It does. None of that surprises you in baseball when you have good talent. Okay, I was not being incredibly rude, not listening to Chris. I was actually trying to find an answer to a question we had from Alex, who said, what is the capacity for home baseball right now? Heard it was season ticket holders only. Is that true? So the season right now is totally sold out, aside from a very limited single game availability in the pavilion area. And this may be a little bit outdated. This was what I was told when the season was starting. But you can sort of reserve, I think it's 4 tickets to reserve a table for a midweek game, or 6 for a SEC weekend. So you have to buy them all together and reserve a table down there if you want to get in. Now, you may still be able to find some tickets. I don't know the situation outside of the stadium. I don't know the situation on StubHub and stuff like that. It seems like it's been a little bit more, not a little bit, it's been a lot more difficult to find those options as well. So last we also heard from South Carolina, Chris, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this one, but there were no plans yet to expand the number of fans that are let in the stadium. They had an announcement, a release about that not too long ago, because some changes were made, as far as what you could do, but the recommendation from the CDC was still not to have these really big crowds. So maybe if this team goes on a run, Chris, and hosts, an NCAA, tournament game, if it gets to that point, maybe you look at getting some more people in there then. But right now, tickets actually very hard to come by, it sounds like.
Wes, before we move on, I know we're probably going to need to address hoops right before we close the show today, but we're talking about baseball, right, still. And I had to go look up, obviously with Vanderbilt, you mentioned, you never know what will happen. I remember in 2005, South Carolina went down to LSU, who was number 6, and swept them at Alex Box, rarely happened. That LSU team, they made the tournament. It turned out not to be that great. They won 40 games, but they weren't that great of a team. But Kumar Rocker, son of Tracy Rocker, starting pitcher for Vanderbilt, and projected very high MLB draft pick. This guy has been unreal. I mentioned that, South Carolina's going to face some guys that are just as good as the guy that they had on Friday night at Texas, if not better. Kumar Rocker would apply. Wes, Kumar Rocker's numbers so far this year. 4 games, 4-0, a 0.00 ERA.
Pretty good.
23 innings. He's given up 8 hits. He's given up 1 run, no earned runs. Struck out 34 batters. And opponents are hitting 108. So that just, I mean, he's probably the best guy if I had to guess. I'm not a baseball scout. Colin would know more than I would. Don't take offense, probably more than you would if you've scouted all the SEC pitchers. I don't think you have.
No.
But we'll ask Colin about that. But Kumar Rocker, I mean, that's when you just almost have to hope the guy has an off night. He's ridiculous.
Yeah, you just hope that he's due to have a bad day. You know, everybody has a bad day. You just hope that it's against you, and you got to grind. You just got to grind out at bats against guys like that. I remember the teams for South Carolina that won the titles. They'd roll Blake Cooper out there, and he'd be, quote, overmatched.
Yeah, right.
So many times.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then so many times he'd grind it out on his end. South Carolina's hitters would grind it out on their end. Same thing with Michael Roth when he took over the Friday spot. He'd be, outmatched as far as, because they'd be looking at these guys as Major League Baseball prospects as opposed to college pitchers. And, it's just different. Now, Rocker is an exceptional Major League Baseball prospect by every indication, and also an exceptional college pitcher. I'm sure he's exceptional in high school as well. So it's tough. We'll see what happens. But that's why you play in this league, is to sort of match yourself up with the best. And I do think, Chris, South Carolina really will look back, and they needed to steal one win from this past weekend.
Yeah.
Honestly. If you went out there and went 1-2 though, and just learned something about yourself, then it's probably actually a successful weekend. Now, I don't think it's ever a successful weekend when you get swept. So, I'm not going to say that it is, but I do think playing a team that is up to the caliber of Texas probably actually gives you a little better chance to go win a game or two at Vandy, just because you experience that heading into this coming weekend. So we'll see if that pays off for South Carolina moving forward, and what is to come from this baseball season. Because again, there's some pressure on them, because the other sports, as far as on the men's side, have not been fun for Gamecock fans, which I guess is our segue to our final conversation of the show about the men's basketball program and the future of it, which we have learned now, Chris, doing this show for a little while now. We have to be very careful what we say, because it could easily be old news.
Yep. In
a matter of hours,
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier on the show. I said, guys, we're going to talk about the basketball situation, but I cautioned our podcast listeners, after thanking them, thank you again for listening on the pod, that by the time they listen, if you listen the next day, for instance, it could be outdated. So keep in mind, right now, as we start talking about this, it's 1:55 on Monday, March 15th. So, Wes, I'm gonna tee it up for you. Let you lead it off. What's the latest on the hoop situation? Where do we think this thing is going? Do we have a good sense of it yet?
Yeah, and Chris, it's been one of these things. I feel like it is accurate to say that it has been simmering or bubbling, behind the scenes, under the surface, whatever words you want to use, for a few weeks now. And now I believe it's sort of finally coming to a head this week. And, I suspect we're going to know here pretty shortly, which is why, we said that, not shortly like in minutes, but shortly within, maybe today, maybe tomorrow, maybe midweek. We'll see how this plays out. To answer your question, I tend to still conservatively think that it is a fluid situation as of the very last we heard. And I say fluid in the sense of it has not been completely decided and then conveyed to Frank Martin, that you're out. And I think, Chris, there are a lot of different variables at play here. And I think there's a worry, I would say, from the administration side about apathy setting in with your fan base. That was a huge deal with football. That was a huge part, I believe, of the deciding factor in paying this buyout for football was that apathy had set in among the South Carolina fan base. There's a worry that is setting in, I believe. And I think the worry is valid just from what we see. I think, Chris, we have a pretty good judge of where the collective mindset of the fan base is right now. So I get it. I also don't know. We'll find out is South Carolina ready to pay a $6+ million buyout, to have Frank Martin go away. Now, there has been talk, obviously, in multiple off seasons. There's been a lot of talk this off season about could Frank Martin possibly take another job elsewhere. To me, that's probably still a possibility because Frank Martin wants to coach. This is not, by every indications, this is not a ride off and go talk about basketball on TV situation. I think that when Frank Martin says in press conferences that he wants to coach, I take that at face value based on other things I've heard that he does want to coach. I think he wants to coach at South Carolina. Now, whether that can actually happen or not clearly remains to be seen. We know for a fact Frank Martin will be meeting with higher ups this week, has already met with some of them, we believe. And, we'll see where those conversations go. I think Chris and you and I are sort of on the same page about where we are leaning, believing it's probably headed, but we're also we're a little bit more maybe conservative than some people as far as what we just throw out there. Because again, the word fluid keeps popping back into my brain that we don't know what way this thing will actually play out. And I will say, that there are obviously situations with South Carolina where where the results have not been good enough, and you certainly understand that side. And then the other side of it is that if you're going to sort of, regardless of how it actually happens, if you're going to ease Frank Martin out, you need to have a really good plan for how to. It does no good to fire somebody just to fire somebody, or just push somebody out just to push somebody out, right?
Yeah.
It does good if you can upgrade a position. So what is the plan to possibly upgrade? I think is the question a lot of fans, I would imagine, have on their minds right now.
Yeah, and I think you encapsulated it well there. I think what I would go to is that just in some of the conversations that we've had, one of the things that I heard was that there's, when it comes to the sort of the Frank Martin situation, the basketball situation, there's just not really any great options right now, because there has been some apathy setting in. Obviously, this season hasn't gone well, and you sort of pile that onto the way the last maybe few seasons have gone. There's some concerns there, some recruiting concerns, some on-court concerns. You couple that with the buyout, which, Wes, I think we're on the same page with this. I think that is the buyout figure. A lot of people think, well, a lot of times you see buyouts get lowered. I think that's probably the buyout. That's probably what it's going to be given these circumstances. And so you've also got, hey, who can you go get? Because Frank Martin, there's a good argument to be made that he's the best basketball coach South Carolina's had, just based on some things he's done, right? But it's also not gone well lately. So I think there's just a feeling of there not being a lot of great options. And so where does it go? I think we are on the same wavelength as far as where it's probably headed. But again, from what we know, sitting here right now at 2 p.m. on Monday, the 15th, nothing done yet, and still not ready to say that this or that is definitely happening. So we'll just have to continue to monitor that.
Yeah, and I do wonder, Chris, where if you could poll the entire fan base, I wonder where people would be. As far as what the percentage would look like, how split is the fan base, and is it, even then there are degrees to which somebody feels a certain way. It could be, I guess I would keep them, or I guess I would want to move on, or there can be, we're ready to move. I mean, let's be honest, the football side, most of the fan base, I feel like, was pretty strongly towards making a change. So I think it's one of these things where, again, if you make a change, let me back up for a second. The question with South Carolina right now, I think, is, are you better off? What does Frank Martin see as the problems? What is his plan to possibly fix it? And then what does the administration see as the problems? And who would they bring in to fix it that they realistically can bring in? I think, I was on JB and Goldwater earlier today, Chris. We were talking about this. How many of the problems at South Carolina are coach problems? And how many are problems that have kind of just been there forever with the men's basketball program? Because ultimately, this is one of those sort of no duh type things, but ultimately, whoever is here has to find a way to keep some of these dudes in state. Right now, That's easy for us to go on our YouTube show and talk about. The answer is how. And then, so the answer is also who, as in who has a plan that's not just, oh, we have to put a fence around the state.
Yeah.
No. How are you going to do it?
Yeah.
And I'm not even talking about the Zions. So if a Zion Williamson comes along and he goes to Duke, that's not what I'm talking about. The guys you lose to Duke, the guys you lose to UNC, it happens. For South Carolina, to me, it's avoiding losing in-state people to Tennessee, to Alabama, to Ole Miss, to Vanderbilt. And you can make a case in all those instances, well, he was looking for this, or this guy wanted that. The case with Devontae Shuler going to Ole Miss, everything I always heard, he was always going to probably try to get away from the Columbia area. So you can make sense of why they happen individually. And I'm not even, Chris, saying you have to sign every single guy. That's never going to happen. But if South Carolina had gotten the right guys in state, we're probably sitting here discussing, should South Carolina have been a 7 seed or a 6 seed in the tournament they're about to play in this Saturday? Because Frank Martin, there's no doubt in my mind Frank Martin can coach. There's no doubt in my mind. What is the issue that has kept South Carolina from getting the top players in the state for as long as I can remember, other than some, exceptions along the way? Whoever can solve that is the guy you either should keep if it's Frank Martin, or that you should go hire.
Yeah, and, you look at Frank's, we talked about this the other day on the phone, Wes. I mean, the year that they made the Final Four, that was a great team. The way the team was, the composition of that team was great, just in terms of what they had, the different experience levels, the different skill sets. But that team, what was a key difference? Justin Mackey played a great role. you had a freshman Mike Coatsar. Like, you had a lot of great role players, but you had Dwayne Otis, who's just this hard-nosed, Frank Martin find, right, out of Canada. But they had 2 blue chippers on that team. You had Sindarius Thornwell, who played up at Oak Hill, but he was just a different type of cat. And so Frank was able to sign him, leverage that relationship. And then PJ Dozier, who really, out of all these like blue chip type guys that you've mentioned, this guy's out of state, this guy's out of state. I mean, most of them, right? PJ Dozier's the one they kept in state. And what happened? They went to the Final Four. Not saying if they signed a couple blue chippers, every year or whatever, they're going to go to the Final Four every year. I mean, teams across college basketball do that every year, and it's hard to make the Final Four. But it just shows you the year that they did it, that was the most talented team that they had, right? And so you do need that. And so solving the recruiting problem, it does go beyond just hire a good recruiter. Okay. I mean, it's almost like in football, like we talk about, you don't just say, hey, Alabama's got this great recruiter at Alabama. We're going to hire him at South Carolina, and he's going to be awesome at recruiting. It's not that simple. And I don't think it's that simple with South Carolina with the basketball program. So I think there's some of both, Wes. I mean, I totally agree with you. There's some maybe systemic things that you have to try to fix in basketball. And so the people that make those decisions are going to have to weigh all that in.
Yeah. So we'll see, man. I mean, I know for those listening, watching, whatever, none of that answers your question, but we'll see. We'll see if we find answers later today or later on this week, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll see where South Carolina goes from here. But I think part of it also is part of this equation is how many people, how many current players are back next year, and does South Carolina? I think, Chris, they almost maybe look at what happened with Muschamp when you held on another year and then you had to make the move anyway. What does South Carolina's basketball team look like next year? How many guys transfer out? How many guys try to go play professionally somewhere? If you're not going to have a good team next year and you're going to keep Frank Martin on, then you put yourself in a position where you're just delaying the inevitable. Now, it might be a little bit cheaper by about $3 million. So maybe that's part of your conversation as well. But some people will take you sort of must do now what you're going to have to do eventually, anyway. So I don't know. We'll see. Again, we'll have some resolution on all this, and then we'll find out if Frank Martin's back or if we're covering another coaching search and go from there. So, all right, I think that's going to do it for today's show. Chris, you got any closing thoughts, man?
No, man, went a little over. So we'll get back to trying to dig in more on this hoop situation and spring practice. I told the people earlier, Wes, I shamelessly plugged a subscription to GamecockCentral.com. So hopefully we'll get some new subscribers. It is a great time, no doubt about it, to be on board with us at GamecockCentral.com.
Yeah, come on over. We'll cover all that. We'll cover football, of course, and then, of course, Colin Taylor, who'll probably join us on Friday, I would imagine. We'll be talking some baseball on Gamecock Central, as always. So, all right, y'all, we appreciate it. For Chris, I'm Wes. We'll see you all on Wednesday.